comes down to computers communicating.
The information superhighway can be a confusing mix of on-ramps and off-ramps.
Bitcoin is worthless artificial gold.
Is it still rat poison?
Probably rat poison squared.
We need to get into the world of, okay, this is actually foundational technology.
What the Internet of Money does is it creates a single network which can do a microtransaction to a gigatransaction.
The Internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash.
All right, gentlemen, welcome back. Another episode of Final Settlement. Today is Monday, January 5th, 2026, boys. The new year. I take it you both had great holiday seasons, rang in the new year with friends and family, hopefully. And, a few things did occur while we were away. We had about a 2-week, maybe a 2-week plus hiatus from the show. So it feels good to be back, but a lot occurred. Just to name a few things, gold and silver continued to rip through the end of the year. I think silver went over 80 at a certain point. I think it's back around 75 now. There was a really good chart that showed basically inflation was the most persistent, consistent theme of 2025. I'm pulling that up right now. You can see, we live in a very short news cycle these days. So you can see all these blips on, various things that came up throughout the year. The date axis is on the bottom here, but you see inflation here, just persistent. The one thing that rang true through the entire year, individuals, businesses, nation states were thinking about inflation. In tandem, a few days ago, we captured the president of Venezuela. Maybe we took 600,000 Bitcoin. We're not really sure. Still waiting for details on that. But we also had an interesting tweet from Patrick Witt, who is the executive director to the President's Council of Advisors for Digital Assets and also the deputy director for the Department of War of Strategic Capital. He said something to the effect of Venezuela should adopt U.S. dollar stablecoins. And so this is maybe indicative of the trend of 2025, but really I think where we're headed in 2026 is further integration of digital assets, namely stablecoins, whether that's banks in the U.S. Or countries that we're now proverbially running for an interim period. Maybe we just force them to use U.S. dollar stablecoins. Gentlemen, what do we think about all this? Where should we head? There's a lot of different directions we can head. I guess first and foremost, how were your breaks? I take it you guys are happy to be back on the show?
Well, my break was good until you just outlined the world is completely changed in 7 days or 14 days. That's great. No, the break was good, but excited to be back. It was well needed. We try to take, good 10 to 14 business days off the entire team to recharge. But you get to enjoy what you do, and you're looking forward to Monday. You didn't have the Sunday scaries and getting to recap all this stuff. And in reality, it's like this podcast, at least personally, serves as a good way to synthesize and articulate like what the hell's going on, think about it, pull some of the main threads, and then discuss them. And I think it's going to be important heading into 2026 and beyond, because there's just so much happening. And when you get to like talk about these different angles and then how we all know they relate back to a broken monetary system, you can start to spot trends. You can start to realize what's happening. What are the other implications? So yeah, it was a crazy 7 to 14 days. News cycle so kind of like quick, but all the things you alluded to. I mean, there was the stuff with this silver and gold, just like ripping, is something that's just widely not still talked about or understood in the traditional markets. And those are real signals that things are breaking. And then obviously the oil situation as well. We're going to start to see, we've been talking about this, but scarce assets and commodities specifically, where they look and how they perform in the coming 5 to 10 years with the proliferation of inflation. It's going to be crazy times.
I didn't even mention this, but Bitcoin's kind of ripping. This is the year-to-date chart, 7.32% up, all but erased 2025's losses. So are we back, boys?
Could be a great year.
we're going to have some more volatility, especially in the first half of the year, but pretty optimistic, especially about the second half. There's too much volatility out there, and sooner or later, people are going to recognize Bitcoin as a safe haven in a sea of noise.
Yeah, I think to that point, a lot of this stuff would look obvious in retrospect, where it was a little crazy in Q4, the bearishness around um, specifically like Luke Groman and some of the other macro thinkers selling their Bitcoin because of quantum or because of other Fourier cycles still mapping. When in reality, we've talked about this, there's been a structural change and there's a consistent bid for scarce assets, mainly gold. We've seen silver, Bitcoin. And so when you tie that into a secular trend, well, why would the price of Bitcoin go down this year? Because of like who's selling and what are they selling for? Especially when you look at the things we've been talking about when it comes to TradFi and other relevant participants getting involved in this ecosystem. So yeah, I think we've held that stance that we're going to have a big year in 2026 and excited to see it play out.
Yeah, and you mentioned sort of I think one of the big takeaways from last year was, despite the choppy price action in Bitcoin in particular, there were a lot of fundamental, positive, constructive developments in terms of basically, one, the Overton window moving, sort of the stigma around Bitcoin and digital assets being somewhat removed. I mean, there's still some of that, but institutions, whether it's banks, fintechs, traditional incumbents that are putting their chips on the table, either acquiring crypto native companies, partnering with them as sub-custodians, basically figuring out what their game plan is. And so, Michael, you had shared a 2026 outlook report that the Block put together. And there was a lot of good charts in here. Maybe tell me which pages you want me to go to first. But this really tells a pretty compelling story of a lot of what we do know around the regulatory environment, which has shifted materially over the past, call it 12 to 18 months, the passage of the Genius Act last year, and really a lot of people coalescing around like stablecoins are going to be a thing. And in addition to that, real world assets, I think you'd shared a chart in here that they grew about 3x in 2025. I will say they grew to like 16 or 17 billion, like total real world assets that exist. That is like not that crazy of a number. I know the growth is strong, but like Cardano's market cap is like 16 billion. Just to put it in context of like other crypto stuff. But where do you want to go in this report, Mike?
Yeah, I think they're not necessarily apples to apples, just given that Cardano doesn't have any kind of there's no backing. Real world assets theoretically are tied to some physical assets, so somebody had to pledge it, have provenance. But before we go into that, I think the biggest one, and I don't remember if it was this report or another one, but it was the regulatory slide. I think I posted that in the Slack channel. We don't have to pull it up, but there was a regulatory slide that popped up. I think this was in Grayscale's report, and it really just showed. Let me find it real quick so I can just read off of a few of the crazy. I mean, like when you see them all together. So there's SEC rescinded the SAB 121. There was SEC dropped investigations in the lawsuits. The White House creating the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. Federal Reserve, FDIC, and OCC dropping reputational risk. SEC issued staff statements staking activities were allowed. White House and Department of Labor allowing 401ks to get exposure. SEC in June withdrew a variety of proposed rules that would have brought certain smart contracts. I don't think anybody cares about that. White House and Congress passed Genius Act. SEC approved general listing standards for crypto exchange traded products. And then Treasury IRS issued safe harbor rules for staking and crypto ETPs. I feel like that's not even like half, or that's about half of them. But I think that is a huge one for when you look at the opportunity set in this market, specifically with like incumbents and why they had it figured out their plans, had it developed M&A strategies or anything alike, is because, and specifically for also high net worth and institutions, because of the regulatory concern. And then I think also in that doc that you had the M&A aspect continuing to grow. It's very interesting because there's a lot of notable smart folks that play in the crypto digital asset investing lens. And they recognize that banks need to acquire custodians. There's not enough assets to go around. So I think that will be a growing trend. The other one that's fascinating, I don't know if it came up in this report, but and then we can go back to the RWA, is really the notion that a lot of people in their predictions expect a very large hack. They recognize that security, I mean, we see this. I think every week there's a pretty sizable hack that happens in the industry. Sizable is relative. And then also is it related to Bitcoin or other crypto assets? But I think that is just how much opportunity side we have when it comes to early riders, and we're building at Onramp with multi-institution custody, is the vast majority of the market doesn't even necessarily know that there's a differentiated way to custody assets where you don't have a single point of failure. And they're all ready and waiting for something like that to happen. But I think, tuning our own horn, I think this year will be a big year for the rest of the market to really wake up and realize that there's a better way to custody the cornerstone. It's not even the blue chip. It is the market when you think about it being 60 to 70% of the total market.
Yeah. And looking at the everything you walked through in terms of updated regulatory guidance, I just feel like everybody's really forgotten about everything that happened with FTX, BlockFi, Celsius, etc. Because in reality, what most consumers actually want is just assurances that there is non-rehypothecation if you just buy Bitcoin on an exchange. And ultimately, that is not anything that has any regulatory legs within the administration, and people are maybe even just forgetting that even happened, and that's the reason that there was a lot of losses back in that 2021 timeframe. Obviously, there was just straight up outright fraud too, and maybe it's just the fact that banks are getting involved and they have more lobbying power than the crypto industry in general. But it seems like a massive misstep, and something where despite everything that happened back in the 2021 timeframe, there's really been no meaningful change in market structure that would prevent any significant loss of customer funds moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point in the sense that I think a lot of what has transpired on the regulatory front is not being properly priced in the sense that, if you think about, Bitcoin sort of being in this range for 12 months, it never making a new all-time in gold terms, so kind of being in this quasi bear market in our view for a couple of years now. Every other time that's sort of been the case of Bitcoin bear market, like you see an exodus of participation from either institutional banks, fintechs, incumbents. All of that stuff is moving in the opposite direction, like in a positive direction in terms of their embrace and their adoption of these things. And that is directly related or a function of the regulatory environment and the pivot that's occurred at basically all the agencies, whether it's CFTC or the SEC, which has a very pro-crypto new chairman. All of that is sort of like the exact opposite of what we saw in 22 when things sort of collapsed, where everybody just like ran away from the asset class. And that happened multiple times, right, in past cycles. Whereas we haven't seen that this time, despite the sort of lackluster lackluster performance, but really, it was fine performance. It just didn't live up to the expectations that people had going into 2025. One thing in this, in the other, the block report that I just came across this was an interesting chart. The VC funding by category. You can see this massive spike in the middle of the year where, basically all of the capital was going into funding these DATs. And it's just interesting in the sense that like, you can see it, there's kind of growth throughout the year, again, despite, choppy price action. But to me, this is just like, just clearly showing like a lot of capital, most capital still being misallocated in this market. And I think this is something we know intuitively, but like seeing this on a chart is pretty ridiculous to see that there's just this massive spike. It looks like almost 12 billion poured into like just DAT structures, which, those corrected materially. And a lot of those are, I'd say most of them are below 1x MNAV now. A lot of the stock prices are down 95% plus. So just a lot of capital destruction in this market. And then on the other side, you have people, funding stablecoin projects effectively. Like it's kind of barbelled. It's either you were chasing DAT structures or you were looking at infrastructure that was going to be adopted by these traditional incumbents, banks, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think your point around the regulatory and the market, I think there was a chart we had that was showing 2025 had the lowest volatility for Bitcoin in Bitcoin's 17-year history. And I think like when you take that into account, it's really a feature and helps TradFi adopt this asset and feel confident in where it's going. You also look at like what the Trump admin did as it relates to, or not necessarily the Trump admin, but their friends and family, what they did as far as packing their bags and their involvement in this industry. There was a lot of setting the stage for what's happening, we expect to happen in 2026. I think you also tie in a lot.
When it comes to holding Bitcoin securely, peace of mind starts with architecture. Onramp's multi-institution custody distributes control across 3 independent regulated key holders in a 2 of 3 quorum. No single point of failure, no pooled or omnibus exposure, segregated client-titled vaults. You retain full legal ownership while Onramp coordinates security, compliance, and operational workflows behind the scenes. It's strength of many delivered through the simplicity of one. Multi-institution custody is the foundation for everything we build. Sound infrastructure that distributes counterparty risk and provides fault-tolerant resilience with clear audits and institutional controls. And now Onramp is piloting flat, predictable pricing, making best-in-class Bitcoin custody and financial services more accessible now than ever. Onramp, strength in many, simplicity in one. To learn more, check out onrampbitcoin.com.
Of the things that have happened publicly and that we've heard privately in the banking sector around turning on custody, lending, stable coins. A lot of this stuff just took time. And I think a lot of people forget that the industry was so antagonistic from regulatory policy to the administration to digital assets that Trump winning and then their favorability to the asset class really took a lot of people by surprise. And so they had to course correct into what's our plan. And they're still doing that today. And so you can see maybe part of that price appreciation was the market pricing that in, but we haven't got anywhere near, the interesting blow off top reflexivity of retail coming into a new asset class. We're just seeing like the smart money really place their chips right now. We haven't really seen the retail buzz, which I kind of suspect similar to AI we saw in 25, like digital assets will be in that same vein. They will end up intersecting together because of a lot of the stuff that's related to, LLMs and needing stable coins or other units to power them.
Yeah. And I forget which one of you mentioned this, but like the notion that these incumbents are, either doing acquisitions or doing sub-custodian partnerships, like they aren't fundamentally solving for what we've discussed around single counterparty risk, right? Like there is, in all of these outlook reports, there's sections on, the increasing risk of both physical and digital attacks for, digital bear assets, whether it's Bitcoin or other crypto assets. It's increasingly being talked about as a problem. There was an article in Bloomberg that talked specifically about this a couple days ago. I'm pulling that up now. But no one has really solved for this in the sense that, all of these partnerships and sub-custodian relationships are just effectively grafting onto what already exists. So that's, Coinbase custody, other single entity custodians. And so I think there's a focus on sort of the symptoms of this, but like not actually how to solve for it. And so I think as we look ahead this year, I would expect a lot of this stuff to accelerate in terms of what's talked about here in this article. So the title is Small-Time Crypto Investors Are Facing Violent Attacks. And it's a little misleading because it's not just small-time crypto investors. It's really, we've seen COOs and CEOs of crypto companies be targeted in this stuff. But what this article really talks about is, effectively, think about the sort of normal average person who has some holdings on Coinbase. They are extremely susceptible to social engineering attacks. And there are effectively these criminal rings of people that just are targeting these specific people who don't have really sophisticated crypto knowledge. They probably don't understand that, it's a bearer asset. And if they are to give up the credentials to their account, their account could be wiped in seconds, and there's really no recourse, both in terms of their ability to stop it from happening, but also the Coinbase side of things. Like, they are not held liable for either wrench attacks or digital social engineering attacks. So there's really no recourse when this stuff happens. And so there's been reported billions of these types of thefts, which is likely super underreported, because if this type of attack occurs, you probably don't want to be super public about it, in anticipation that it could happen again if that information is out there. So scary stuff, but this is I think something that we need to continue talking about. Like, better products do need to exist for this stuff, because effectively these institutions and other allocators are coming into this market and really just thinking about sort of 2D solutions that have already existed, basically just ceding control to a single counterparty, which we just know hasn't worked historically.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's not fun to talk about this stuff too, especially in light of the Ledger leak this morning of customer personal identifiable information. But it's something that I've been thinking about a little bit more. And just the fact that really one of the big gaps in the market is just that the self-custody principles are 100% right. You want to sever the internet connection. You want cold storage Bitcoin. You don't want a single counterparty that can essentially lose your funds, even if it's yourself. So many people use multi-sigs for large holdings, etc. But it's just something that unfortunately is not operationally scalable, either at the personal level, because many people are unwilling or to take the time to do that, or it just can't scale to businesses, funds, etc. And so there, a lot of people who aren't willing to take the time to do that, or can't for one reason or another, or know about things like this and their families don't want them to do it. There's just no other real great solution, just given everything that we've talked about the hacks that have continued to happen and will likely persist into the future, as well as just the social engineering on the exchange front, and instances of customer mismanagement of funds. So it's something that I've just been thinking about. The industry needs to kind of get better at as a whole in the future.
Yeah, I think the reality is that we talk about being early, but this is a pure product of how early we are. Because Liam had recommended a good book, because a big part of what our plan for Onramp this year is to really, there'll be more news and announcements, but making multi-institution more available to a larger portion of the market. So reducing costs, having self-onboarding, just making it really easy for almost anybody that has material allocation to use multi-institution custody. And not necessarily has to be a substitute for self-custody, but to be accretive, especially as these things start to increase. It can even be leveraged as a like error cover. It's like, look, I don't have possession. It takes, X number of days that you set up to move the assets. But while we do that, there's this notion of the adoption wave and like crossing the chasm, and in the general, and I might butcher a little bit, but directionally this will make sense. Is like, you have the tech forward people that are adopt things early, and then you have the innovators that come right after that. And then there's this like chasm to cross, which I think we're at as a $2 trillion asset, which is the early majority. And then you kind of go to the late majority, and then you have the laggards at the end. And the reality is the technology has to increase. The commercial viability has to increase if you're going to cross that chasm. So a lot of people never get there. And there's great examples like VR as a good one. It's like, you can get the early people really interested, but then how do you actually get it to be commercially viable, cheap, not look like a crazy person wearing it? And one of the things I've been thinking about, it's not perfect, but it's like, because a lot of people don't necessarily even know that they have a problem with inflation. And then they also don't necessarily know they have a problem with custody, because most people have a very small exposure to Bitcoin. So they're like, I don't really care how I custody it, whether it's in a ledger or and they're leaking my PII until somebody shows up, then you have a problem. Or until if it's at Coinbase, because if they lose it, it's only 1% of my net worth. But the reality is, like, I feel like there's a mental model here, because at least a lot of people recognize that LLMs and AI, whoever wins that race, wins kind of the future. And it's like, by holding or allocating to Bitcoin basically gives you the best form of AI that's ever existed. and you effectively get to outcompete everyone else that are here to use that. And the angle though is that the only way to use that is you have to, like, if you're going to hold a large percentage of your wealth, and this kind of like corollary with a large percentage of your time to use it, is you have to feel really good about how do you custody it. Because if you don't feel really good about it, how you can tell somebody you have the best LLM, but like, how do you use it? How do you like power it? Whatever the example in this analogy would be, it's like, well, you need to be able to safely custody it with assurance it was there. And so that's really what's happening. It's like people's wealth is deteriorating, their time is deteriorating, their mental bandwidth, and they don't have peace of mind because they don't actually know that the problem exists. And then if they get the problem, well, they don't feel comfortable in allocating a sizable amount. And I think as that just proliferates and grows from a marketing perspective, and then multi-institution grows and the ability to get the assurances of self-custody without the friction, you can really start to like cross that chasm into mainstream adoption. There'll be different iterations and implementations of multi-institution. I think this really helps in a market where people go from speculating to like, all Bitcoin is the best savings account that's ever existed. Yeah. And like everyone wants the best savings account that's ever existed. It's just like they don't know how to do it because either they think it's a Ponzi because they conflate it with crypto, or they just don't understand how do you custody an ephemeral asset that you can't touch. So yeah, it's an exciting time. And like Liam and I were on a conversation with a large bank and potentially getting involved. And one of the things they said started off a little warm. And then towards the end, they're like, wait, so once somebody gets hacked, this will all be obvious. And it's like, yes, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with all that. The only thing I was going to say is like, I think part of the near term issue is that like most people don't think in long time horizons. So like, even if they want to be able to save money for the future, it's very difficult for them to see the light of Bitcoin as superior savings technology, particularly given the past 12 months of like choppy price action, watching gold rip, watching silver rip. Like it becomes very easy to dismiss Bitcoin as savings technology if you watch it for 12 months and it doesn't really move. So most people don't have, one, the deep understanding of like what it is, how it works, why it's resilient, why its monetary properties are superior to gold, et cetera. And they just typically have a shorter time horizon on it. So I think that's part of the rub today, and part of why, one, you see the nihilism in markets, the casinofication of everything, prediction markets really taking off this past year, because people's time horizons are just not oriented towards the long term, and being able to hold an asset like Bitcoin for 4 to 5 years to really see the benefits of sound money. And so I think that's part of the story too, is like there is this intense nihilism in markets today. There was a good Twitter article that spoke to this and very sort of succinctly summarized where we're at. It was kind of a doomerism post of like, basically young people in particular have no other option other than to gamble, because they see the wave of AI taking their jobs, and they see basically assets like houses really out of reach, and so they're forced into this speculator mode and gambling on prediction markets, et cetera. I would say that that's a little bit too doomer in my take, in my mind, in the sense that like if you have agency as a person, like you can leverage those deflationary tools that you think are taking your job to create value in the world. Like it's never been easier to spin up a business with one person and very little capital. And this is something we talk about a lot in the context of our thesis at Early Riders and the ability to do more with less. Like all of these things are changing in real time, and it takes someone with agency and recognizing the power of a lot of these tools to actually harness them. And so that goes across software, AI, but also the money itself, right? Adopting Bitcoin as a superior treasury asset for a business or a builder or a founder. They're related and they're sort of connected. But like, if you don't embrace those things, then yes, you're going to be still on that treadmill and getting outcompeted by those who do adopt these standards. I would say that is a part of it. Like it is the short-term thinking, the nihilism that's sort of confronting what you described, Michael, of like, yes, this is the obvious thing. You should be adopting Bitcoin. You should be using superior savings technology. But I think that it's still a big leap for people. And it goes back to what you said, like we are still just early.
Yeah. I think I'm optimistic in the sense that this ties into maybe there was a lot going on over the past 2 weeks. Maybe I felt more because I had more time on my hands to be on Twitter as it relates to the new models that are coming out and the efficiencies and like where we're heading. But I think there's a reality of the market corrects to the current thing and where it's going. So the example is all the slop that exists on Twitter and just like social content. Like we recognize that we're going to have more and more of that. And so in that world, authenticity reigns supreme. You're going to have a resurgence of just like a more authentic media opportunity set. And so the point in sharing that is as like more and more people recognize how to navigate that, it's a very similar concept of right now people are speculating, they're nihilistic, but as you start to see like whether you're holding crypto and you're getting rug pulled and whatever happens there, you start to realize whether it's gold and silver and you see them run and you start to go down the rabbit hole of like scarce assets and what like derives value or ultimately Bitcoin, like there'll be a chasm that's crossed where people just realize, oh, this is the savings account for the digital age. And I just sweep my funds into there. And then that kind of shifts that whole notion of nihilism because you end up going from, wait, I can't get ahead to wait, this thing can't be debased. And now you can start. And so I think it just will take time.
Yeah, the fact that Bitcoin isn't even in the top financial nihilism assets in terms of, gambling is just a fact that we're not in a real bull market either, because historically that's just, unfortunately, for better or worse, like how most people have allocated to Bitcoin, at least for the first time, and then they'll like learn more to see if they're actually on something or crazy too. So, ultimately, for better or worse, like that is how most of the people are going to come into Bitcoin, is just the reflexive price. But I've also been thinking about this AI topic more too, and I think we're kind of using it like cavemen, almost like. And I really do want something to be built, or kind of almost social proof sharing, how people who are either freelancers or at the top of their game, and to be able to show their historical usage of AI in order, and then end products in order to, almost create like a YouTube type sensation where people like today they will go to YouTube or some other website for how to change like a chain on your bike or something, but there are much more complex systems and products that people are trying to use with AI, whether it's coding, whatever sort of app, etc. And there can be a lot of essentially profiles of people who go use it for certain aspects, and people can go follow along with that and then use similar end products in order to kind of recreate or use the frameworks that others have used in order to create better end products. And I think that's going to be something that, as you mentioned, the slopification out there, that there needs to be some way for other humans to really understand how people have used these tools in a real way in order to create end products and that they're actually viable, as well as there will end up being just, payouts to these content creators that they're going to call them, or and that'll be used for more information sharing. I think that's probably my one of my predictions that I missed, or that I wish I did, is that somebody like Facebook, who already has a social graph, will lean into this in a big way in 2026, and that just has a lot of far-reaching implications for both enterprise clients, how they can share information across doing things from a certain business perspective, as well as other freelancers using best practices that others have done. Anybody who's starting a new business, I think that many people are using these tools in 2D ways, and they need to learn how to use them in a faster evolving manners too in the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are you kind of describing like almost like this is going to be poor terminology, but like a social credit or scoring system for like your ability to leverage the tools, like something to that effect of like, because yes, like people are using the tools, but it ends up being very slop oriented unless you're doing it in a specific way. Is that kind of what you're getting at, like assessing someone's talent in using the tools?
Well, almost, but like more of like a algorithm based thing where, likes people based on your existing, almost like, this is a crude example, but For You page. Like if you're interested in topic X, Y, and Z, you can find other people who have been successful there, and who, have liked things that are similar to your interests, etc. And that will allow you to better find other tools that can help you in the future too.
Yeah, I think we kind of describe it as like a marketplace, which I think is very interesting. I think it ties into the post that Brian had up. I forgot who had it. The Barely app is pretty cool, but I think it was somebody, maybe they were at Instagram, but they had a report on like content and just a proliferation of the amount of content given utilization of AI tools. That's going to be hard to discern like what is real, what's not. And I do think that it's going to grow. I think for the first time over the break, I was thinking about like Noster and a lot of the different tools built on that we had David King and Max like almost like 2 years ago at this point, talking about one application called Highlighter, which ultimately like you highlighted a part of a blog post and then you could really have like an algorithm or feed that would show the amount of Satoshis that were had highlighted or be contributed. So you can't really DDoS like you had proof of work, you had sats that have been attributed to surface, like what was relevant and what's not. And I think with how crazy Twitter and other just social media and just the internet in general, with the like proliferation of so much content, that the way to discern, we've already seen this, right? Reddit's a great example. I think that's why Reddit probably has a big following, is because they really created the right way to gatekeep some of the slop or posting, because SEO is kind of cracked where you can't really search for anything outside of like, you'll see what's ads pop up versus you go to Reddit and you can see real people liking and surfacing relevant content. And I could, for the first time, kind of see where that starts to play out. So I do think in 2026, we'll see more of that. How do you embed value? It's probably going to end up in stable coins to start, because of just the amount of inertia. And like, people just understand what a dollar's worth. And that's the hard part. I think most Bitcoin investors and folks in this side of the market don't really attribute that it's there's huge mental friction in having to spend your Bitcoin, whether it's spend and replace or whether it's getting a wallet and seeing those sats move and then having to allocate, versus like, imagine you have your bank account. It's the same reason why it's so easy and e-commerce has grown so much. It's like you can just Apple Pay out, you can just quickly load a wallet. Dollars are so much easier to be moving around online. I do think it'll start there, and then it'll be interesting to see what those use cases are where people would actually use Bitcoin versus, a stable coin. But I do think that that'll naturally be a bigger part of the story in 26, is just with how much content's created, there's going to need to be some kind of proof of work mechanism via monetary value.
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know when the sort of that transition occurs where people would rather it be denominated in Satoshis as opposed to dollars, because I think you're right. I think at least initially, people are just going to gravitate towards stablecoin payouts, particularly when you think about like, what Coinbase launched a few weeks ago. Like, basically anyone's going to be able to spin up a sort of branded or themed stablecoin for whatever content they're producing. But your broader point around like the slopification of just content generally, sort of where we're headed in terms of waves of content, and being able to discern what's actually valuable, or even just being able to discern what's human generated, right? Like, I think that's partially where we'll head in terms of like, there will be a premium, and whether that's expressed in stablecoins or Satoshis, there will be a premium on content or information that you can verify is human generated and not explicitly slop. Now, some of that AI generated content will also sort of quote unquote do well in terms of virality. Like, we see that on Twitter today, where like certain slop posts get massive views and engagement. But I think increasingly there will be a recognition that because basically we're going to get so flooded with that type of content, that there's going to need to be basically a way to discern what is highly valuable, and partly what Max Webster has talked about in the past around basically value driven engagement. It's like, instead, and this is what like Stacker News does today, it's like you can tip a post in Satoshis, and then things rank towards the top that have gotten the most sort of monetary value ascribed to them. And so in this world where information and content is basically commoditized and can be produced in mass very cheaply and quickly, those types of sort of rank ordering, value ordering systems, I think are going to become very important. And to your point, like I don't think it jumps right to like Satoshi's necessarily, because these stablecoin networks are being built out and being adopted by these people that would want to discern that type of value, right?
It definitely doesn't. I think like the notion of I guess going back, like I think the real angle or value that's added is surfacing content that people find valuable, independent if it's made by AI and somebody could put a bunch of research together using tools. And that can be much more valuable than somebody that writes the whole piece and just doesn't have any relevance, but is
Right.
able to game the system. So I think like that's just in general a very interesting way that the internet will go. Now, where I think majority of investors have really missed the boat, and this is where the crypto investors in TradFi has at least somewhat gotten it, is like most companies with large distribution channels or just legacy moats, when they look at something that's Bitcoin only, makes zero sense to them. It's like, well, why would I want that for? Whether it's an asset, well, that's super singular in focus. My clients want more, or whether it's like perpetual futures or what is it called? The prediction markets. Like imagine you just had only Bitcoin. It's like, well, people have stable coins and all other things. Point being is, so from a commercial perspective, you would want more than Bitcoin, meaning stable coins, but also just from a like viability of the consumer adopting it. For every person that wants to spend Bitcoin to interact on the internet, there is going to be 100 to 1 million that will rather interact with the US dollar because that's their unit of account. And so it's not to say to get rid of one or the other. And this is really where I think we have an edge, is looking at, well, what are the things that have signal? What are the things that won't rug? It's not offering Solana and all this other crap. It's like, well, stable coins will be there. And probably the category winner will be offering stable coins and Bitcoin next to it. And then we'll transition over to Bitcoin. Because on a long enough time horizon, I don't think anybody knows, but it's the logical progression for somebody to want something that can be debased, that doesn't require KYC, all the positives that we know exist. But it's kind of crazy to believe like, well, that would just start today and you get enough market share. And so I think that's just a big component. And like, we can chat about that, but if there is anything else, I think that ties in a lot to like gold and silver running or Argo investment, even RWAs, is that you're going to just see a lot of, I think where the real opportunity sits are, and Tether is a great example of this. I think Tether is one of the most sophisticated private public actors in the world. And they have had an exchange, obviously pioneered Tether stablecoin, Bitfinex exchange, but then their gold allocations, and then their real estate or land allocations, like these are people that are getting behind tokenized gold, dollars, and BTC, because if you like play out, those are the things that will have value over the course of the next 1 to 10 plus years. So I think that is the lens from an investor to look at, is what are the things that will persist, not like a year from now or 24 months, because obviously probably Solana will be around. But when a faster, bigger, whatever, more distribution blockchain comes about, it's like, who's using Solana? And so you want to build things that have natural moats and needs to persist in the future. And dollars, gold, and Bitcoin, I think, are the lenses. And very few people hold that lens, because most people that like Bitcoin don't think gold is going to have any value. And most people that have like gold don't believe Bitcoin's going to have any value. And they both hate dollars because they're both, short the dollar via those trades. But the reality is the majority of the market's going to take time to get to that. And so if you can integrate that across different media, financial service products, I think that's really going to be some category winners. And the beauty is those can play across different world geographies just based on your distribution as an entrepreneur.
Here's the conversation no one wants to have. If something happened to you tomorrow, could your family access your Bitcoin? Really think about it. The seed phrase hidden in your house, the hardware wallet in the safe, that complex multi-sig setup. You understand it, but does your spouse? Do your children? Billions in Bitcoin are already lost forever because people did not plan for this moment. Onramp's inheritance solution is built into our multi-institution custody from day one. 3 institutions, clear beneficiary designation, and professional succession planning. No technical knowledge required from your heirs. And with our new flat tier pricing starting at $250 monthly, your family won't face surprise custody costs just because Bitcoin appreciated. The same predictable fee whether Bitcoin hits 200K or 2 million. Don't leave your family's future to chance. There's strength in many. Visit onrampbitcoin.com/inheritance. That is onrampbitcoin.com/inheritance.
Yeah, this is it's a great point too. And one of the things that, I mean, it's a little bit of a segue too, but this is really showing the importance of Tether. Really has their fingers all in the third world countries and understands that people there aren't going to naturally only go to Bitcoin because of historically its volatility, and gold's been around for so long and their currencies have been so depreciated that they are naturally out of their existing currencies, and so they'll go to dollars naturally because they depreciate slower, and also gold because that's what they can touch and it's been around for a long time, and it doesn't naturally seem like a Ponzi. Um, and I with the news of Venezuela adopting dollars and stable coins too, is or at least that's what Patrick Witt really is focusing. It's going to be interesting to see if they do USAT or Tether or whatever is naturally the most popular locally, which I honestly don't know. And then I also think that within the next 5 years or so, somebody's going to at least try to have tokenized gold as their national currency, maybe even in collaboration with something else, as their citizens naturally start to opt for USD stablecoins or something else, and they just try to latch on to any existing gold that they have or market momentum. And so naturally, I think that these types of assets will persist for a longer period of time than most people think.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I mean, I think just to highlight Tether a bit, like I would consider them, probably the most, if not one of the most sophisticated actors in these markets. And to Michael's point, like if you look at what they've done in terms of their treasury allocation, sort of portfolio construction over the years, like they are planning for this future that we're describing, where people continue to transact in dollars, whether that's USAT or USDT, depending on your local jurisdiction. Maybe that varies. But increasingly tokenized gold and Bitcoin sitting right next to those things. And Paolo from Tether tweeted that they are building a wallet. I found this interesting because just a few weeks ago, they led an investment in Speed Wallet, which prior to this announcement, I had never heard of, but they led a $8 million strategic investment into Speed Wallet. And then Paolo comes out, a week or two later and says that they're going to build their own wallet. So they're clearly focused on like this future that you want to own, basically that interface where people are interacting with either dollars, Bitcoin, or tokenized gold. And so I think it's worthy to just watch what Tether does, because I think that they've been in this market a long time. They've been allocating, they've been building. And so I think they do have sort of an edge, particularly given their coziness to this current administration. I think it's very logical to watch what they do and sort of see the writing on the wall for where things are headed. But what did you guys make of them announcing the wallet after leading this investment?
Well, I don't necessarily know how much of Speed business is a wallet. It's my understanding they're more of like interchange, like merchant services. They power like ShadePay famously, integration. I'm assuming they have a wallet, but
I think they do make a decent amount of money by just allowing people to buy Bitcoin directly into their wallet, as well as just like buy like Bitcoin debit and credit cards and gift cards, things like that.
yeah, and to Brian's broader point, I think that they have their hands tethered in so many things that like they're building a portfolio of products that are accretive to their end state goal. And that wallet makes sense in the context of everything else they do, whether it's like Bitfinex from an exchange perspective or Tether to house it, offer other services. The funny part about wallets alone, unless you're providing like Privy, which is like B2B2C integrations for other fintechs to like house wallets on behalf of your clients, like wallets in general have historically been very low, like there's no margin really there and there's no business model there. So it's similar to like some of the other stuff Tether's pushed out, like Hole Punch and some of these other things. I think they have their own R&D labs where they like to scratch their own itch. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of uptake that picks up. I think it'll just be generally fascinating to watch how Bitcoin proliferates in this new world when it comes to the sizing in an individual's portfolio. And I say portfolio, but some people don't necessarily look at their net worth as a portfolio. They may have only $10,000 to $50,000. And it's like, how much does that sit in a singular asset? And then does it make sense to park it into a mobile or like wallet that's tied to the internet? Especially we talked about AI, like the amount of agents and things that are going to be out there trying to like, basically steal people's hot assets is going to be incredible. The other thing that I think gets discounted a lot, and this is kind of where I'm paying attention to like what happens in real world assets. In real world assets, it can be a synonym for like tokenized gold, right? It's just anything that exists in the real world that is going to have some kind of like digital presence. Even dollars, I would consider real world assets. I know it's not in the same context. Point being is that like I think people discount the intellectual interest and curiosity and benefits people get from just being like either allocators or diversifying, right? Like it's a crazy thing for most people just to say, I'm going to get rid of everything and put it into BTC. And it's like a cousin of that is like Druckenmiller and some of these world-class investors are saying you pick your winner and you like triple down on it. You put all your eggs in one basket. You watch that basket. Those are world-class people. There's very few people that do that. So I think that's a big missed notion on the Bitcoin side. And I've been there where it's like, oh, everyone's just going to see Bitcoin. They're going to adopt it versus like people are just naturally going to go and hedge and diversify and have other assets. And that's really where the RWA stuff comes into play, whether it's real estate, equities, private equity. I think that when we start to see this world of digitized money, you'll naturally see stable coins, Bitcoin, gold, and then this other portfolio of people getting exposure to these assets, and they'll free float because of the lack of intermediaries required. Now, obviously, that opens up a lot of counterparty risk, and a lot of people will have to touch the stove, and there'll be a lot of bad things that happen. But the bet as an investor is not to like it's not wishful thinking. It's just the reality of like where the market goes. And I think that's really, you've seen this from TradFi in general. The only other last interesting part is like, I forgot what they were called back in 17 and 18. There was like STO, security token offerings. Like this stuff's been tried for a while, but like there's enough of like infrastructure coupled with like administration and TradFi stepping in and very much interested that you can see how this is going to play a big theme heading into 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing I did want to mention was sort of this bit of a departure from what we were just discussing, but the sort of proposed billionaire tax in California and the exodus of talent. And so David Sachs tweeted the other day, he's moving Craft Ventures, his venture firm, to Austin. I think there were a couple of other announcements to a similar effect. But we've kind of talked about like adapting to this new world. One, you need to assess hard assets, storing your value in something that can't be debased. You need to embrace the right deflationary tools, leverage AI in the right ways. And then I would say a third bucket is like jurisdictional arbitrage, effectively. Like if you're going to be operating to the best of your abilities, you probably need to be in a jurisdiction that isn't going to try to seize your private property. And so I think that was fully on display with if you guys watched the most recent All In where David was talking about this announcement and basically just the sort of shifting tides away from Silicon Valley. There's still obviously a lot of activity there with the open AIs of the world and more traditional venture, but you're starting to see that slow exodus to places like Austin. Curious, Michael, if you had any thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is incredibly fascinating. I mean, from a business perspective for us, being headquartered down here, having deep presence in Texas, specifically Austin and Dallas, it's really like we're kind of skating where the puck's going. When you think about the capital's coming here, the entrepreneurs are coming here, and then the friendliness to this asset specifically. It's incredible when you talk to folks about what's happening in West Texas. Everyone kind of knows Midland, but there's like Abilene and other towns where Google, Amazon, Facebook, NVIDIA, like they're setting up like large multi-acre, multi-gigawatt facilities for where we're heading. Like Project Stardate, my understanding, a component of it is out there. And so you see all this growth and you naturally want to be there because I think like there's a lot of things that are this time they truly are different because a lot of the not backlash, but comments when it was a real interesting couple of days with, I think Peter Thiel's also setting up one of his offices down here, obviously Elon. But for every one of these big billionaires, there's no shortage of 10 to 100 other multimillionaires and entrepreneurs that are also moving that these themes will only continue and the market the markets, like they're basically saying, well, the concentration of talent is in New York and is in San Francisco. But we're heading to this new world where from a viability, from a continuity, from not being taxed, all the things that are happening at the political level in these states, it's going to make the logical sense if you're going to stay alive and you're going to flourish, that you're going to want to be in friendly jurisdictions. And so this time is different in the same way we look at this time's different with Bitcoin and gold because of the structural change that's happening. I think there's also very large structural changes that are happening that will really set up Texas to lead, and then some of these other states to increasingly see a mass exodus. The UK, the interesting part is we can look at other countries. They're like canaries where states, they're kind of like forward looking, where you've seen what's happened in Canada, you've seen what's happening in UK and Europe, and they're like 12 to 24 months ahead of what you can see the mass amount of people that have left the UK from a millionaire perspective is going to be a common theme that's already happening, but I think will accelerate in the new year.
Yeah, I mean, it's no, I'm not going to compare the two yet. You can see if you squint really hard, but the number of people who left Venezuela over the past like 20 or so years because of the mess that happened down there is staggering. I think it's like a quarter of the population, and that's like, I'm sure a lot of people had to leave behind their families, etc. It's obviously not quite the same situation here yet, but people will always move from their existing status quo to better situations. But it's also like a similar instance. It's probably not, just because Bitcoin is better money doesn't mean everybody's gonna, identify it instantly and go there right away. It'll take some time, and there are network effects in each of those distinct places. But yeah, it's not great to see from California, and it's very positive for Texas in general.
Well, and I think it's like a flywheel that compounds because we don't have to go deep here, but there was also all the discussions around the fraud. And like the Minnesota fraud's kind of an interesting thing because you can imagine the Minnesota fraud is just pales in comparison to other large states that are very have a bunch of SBA and other loans that are out there. And so I think there's a reason or, whatever that really picked up steam on social. But point being is, what you're seeing is people with agency leave their current situations to go to other locations. And you want those people within your borders. You want to work next to those people because they produce value, right? They don't take value away. And so as that happens, it turns into the culture. Well, we have X, Y, and Z. We talk about money and what's being utilized and like the proliferation of that for merchants. And then from a just pure self-preservation perspective, this is something friends, believe in. I don't necessarily know where it stands and how fast it happens, but as a dollar breaks down, you want the people around you to be already primed to understand sound money and to be able to accept it, right? And so that's like a logical progression from an individual perspective. Like you don't even have to leave to go work at, Starlink or SpaceX or any of these other firms. You can just want something better for your family. But once you get into that gravity and that culture, you naturally start to learn about X, Y, and Z. You see this happen all the time. I've seen this happen with family that left the Northeast and they come down to Texas and then they start questioning. This happened a lot during COVID when it's like, well, why aren't you guys doing it like this? And then when you have to leave Texas, you're like, well, why are they doing it like this when you go back? It's just like once you get out of the proverbial muck or that water you're boiling in. So I think that this is just naturally bullish for business and regional growth. And it'll be fascinating to watch how some of these like countries that have the inertia going, or states and countries that have the inertia going the wrong way, how they can course correct. Because that's like the big thing is in the same way we would tell a naysayer, what would cause Bitcoin to go back? Like what would cause it to go to zero, right? Like there's this inertia, this momentum, the debasement, the decentralization, everything that's in its favor. So now there's this inertia in places like Florida and Texas. And then let's take it the other side and what's happening in the exodus in California and New York as examples. What would cause it to retreat? What would cause it for them to get their shit together and everyone to go back there and then to do it? Because like, unless you can point to that, that is really where we're at as from a United States perspective of like where capital and will continue to go. And it's just accelerated post 2020.
Yeah. And I think there's also a recognition of, whether you're talking about a specific state like California, but as it relates to like the fraud, I thought that this was a good tweet from our buddy Macroscope. Like, I think there's a silver lining here in the sense that like sort of exposing a lot of the government waste, fraud, and abuse, I think it naturally, like if you follow that rabbit hole and you follow that down the path, like you eventually get to recognizing that government's ability to print money is what causes inflation. And the fact that there is so much waste, fraud, and abuse being exposed, that basically, is a light bulb moment for the average person who's never really thought about money. They've never really thought about the causes of inflation. But when you see very explicit waste occurring at the government level, and you recognize that their ability to print money is what enables that fraud and waste to occur in the first place, I think there is a path here for people to start to really go down that path of understanding why hard assets are important and how you need to leverage these things to protect yourself, whether it's your specific jurisdiction or just the money itself. I think this was a very salient point. Like, there is a path here for a lot of this stuff to actually send people, down the right learning curve effectively.
Agreed. We'll see how many people actually go and take that.
Yeah, maybe I'm being too optimistic as always, but
yeah, for sure. I think that a lot of people will just be like, it's the Democrats, or it's Elon Musk being able.
It's also might just get memory hold. Like a lot of this stuff might just get memory hold, like in a few months. So we'll see. All right, boys. Anything else you wanted to cover? We're about an hour.
Maybe one just quick thing to pull up. This is something that was on my radar. I think it's a very interesting opportunity. There's a post by Joe Lonsdale. They invested 8 VCs, actually based down here in Austin as well, into a company. I believe it's called Main Street or something close to that. But the core idea is it's like roughly $10 trillion in capital and investment or enterprise value in small to medium-sized businesses that will be handed off to somebody that doesn't necessarily have anybody to transition. And they invested in a firm that's going to work on a roll-up strategy that will take the time to not only underwrite, but really influence and leverage a lot of the new tools, whether it's AI, software. And we'll link to this, but I thought this is really interesting because I think it's kind of what we've been discussing here. We're not in that area. We've discussed at some point, maybe in the future, you can get into that space. But there's a huge opportunity to what they're describing. I think it's pretty straightforward that there's legacy businesses that don't utilize existing tools. But I think that it's almost like a fool's errand to try to do that unless you fix the money, the stack, the total capital stack. Because you can go and do X, Y, or Z, but if the money's working against you via inflation and you don't understand that, it's not only enough to put the money there and park some capital, but you have to understand what's happening, because until you do, you don't have the right lens to build your business, because you're ultimately just always swimming against the current. And so I think that is just going to be a very large opportunity, whether it's for a business, a private equity, a fund stack, anybody building something like that or thinking about it. We'd love to chat with them, because that's just a very interesting place where we go, is that real capital efficient, smart, strong businesses that are looking to persist or grow into the future, but know that they need better management, but also better capital stacks, and how do they utilize new infrastructure that's coming about. That's going to be a real interesting economic advantage, especially if you're already cash flow, positive. You're able to sweep those funds into better money and go really think about roll up and acquisition and just taking more market share. Being defensive and then offensive. We're still so early. The market doesn't understand Bitcoin's that best, LLM we talked about earlier. But I do think that once the market gets there, there's going to be a lot of opportunities in that space.
All right, gentlemen.
Good stuff.
I think that was a good rip to start the new year. Thanks for joining me as always, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.
Great. Yeah.
Later.
Here's what keeps Bitcoiners awake. You're still securing millions of dollars the same way you secured thousands. That hardware wallet in your drawer, your family's entire future depends on you not losing it, forgetting the PIN, or something happening to you. Onramp's multi-institution custody removes that burden. 3 independent institutions hold your keys, no single point of failure, no seed phrases to protect, no explaining complex recovery processes to your spouse. And now we're offering flat tier pricing. One predictable monthly fee starting at $250, whether Bitcoin is at 100K or 500K. Plus, with Onramp IRAs, you get the same institutional security with tax advantage growth. This is how smart investors protect generational wealth without the weight on their shoulders. There's strength in many. Learn more at onrampbitcoin.com.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the show. If you found the information valuable, please share the episode with a friend or leave a rating on your favorite podcast app. All the links we discussed in today's show will be in the show notes inside your podcast app. Before we finish, a quick reminder that Onramp Media is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed as investment or legal advice. Regardless of where you are on your Bitcoin journey, we'd love to hear from you. Visit onrampbitcoin.com/contact to schedule a consultation with one of our private client advisors.